Oh hi. Melbourne, the second largest city of Australia after Sydney, the capital of the state of Victoria, which was located around Port Phillip Bay. The population with suburbs is about 4,246,345 people, by estimates for 2013. Melbourne, the most southern million-strong city in the world. The city is considered one of the main commercial, industrial and cultural centers of Australia. Melbourne is also often called the sports and cultural capital of the country, as in it there take place many sports and cultural events in life of Australia. This city is well known for the combination of the Victorian and modern architecture, numerous parks and gardens, the many-sided and multinational population. In 1956 Melbourne received the Summer Olympic Games, and in 2006, Games of the Commonwealth. Here in 1981 there took place the meeting of heads of states of the British Commonwealth of the Nations, and in 2006, a G-Summit. In 2017 The Economist magazine the seventh time in a row called Melbourne the most comfortable for accommodation by the city of the planet on set of Science. Melbourne was founded by free settlers in 1835 as the agricultural settlement on the river bank of Jarrah. It occurred 47 years later after emergence of the first European settlement in Australia. Thanks to a gold rush in the state, the city quickly turned into the mother country and became by 1865 the largest and major city of Australia, but at the beginning of the 20th century he yielded the palm to Sydney. During the period since 1901 when the Federation of Australia was formed, until 1927 when for capital needs Canberra was constructed, in Melbourne the Australian government agencies were located. The original building plan of Parliament in Melbourne. Lithograph. Construction began in 1855, but shortly it slowed down. As a result the dome and wings over the reading room weren't constructed. Lithograph of the Royal Exhibition Building constructed especially for holding the World Fair of 1880. Subsequently in his building some more similar events and also opening of the first Parliament of Australia were held. The territory adjacent to the Yarra River and Port Phillip Bay in which Melbourne is located now before arrival of Europeans was inhabited by representatives of the tribe of the Australian natives of Wurundjeri. It is considered to be that natives lived in this area of, at least, 40,000 years. The first attempt to found here the European colony was made by British in 1803 when they formed the unbearable settlement around the Sullivan Bay. However, this settlement was left only several months later. In May and June 1835 the territory in which is located the central and northern parts of the city now was surveyed by John Bettman, one of founders of the Port Phillip Association, who signed with 8 leaders of the tribe of Wurundjeri the contract on sale of cartacres. 2400 km. Adjacent earth. He chose the northern coast of Jarrah for the settlement and declared that on this place the village will be built, then returned to the city of Launceston in Tasmania carrying then the name Van Diemen's Earth. However, when the settlers sent by association arrived to the place for foundation of the village, they found out that there was already a settlement formed by a group of people led by John Pascoe Faulkner, who arrived on board the Enterprise ship here on August 30, 1835. Eventually, both groups came to the agreement on joint development of the territory. The contract, which was signed by Bettman with natives, was soon repealed by the administration of New South Wales, managing at the time the territory of all continental Australia. It meant that the earth carries over Corona, however the rights of the people living here were fixed, and to a again formed city the right for existence was granted. In 1836 the Governor Burke announced the city the administrative centre of the district Port Phillip, which was a part of Colony New South Wales, and in 1837 approved the city forefront known under the name Addlesban. At the end of the same year the city was given the final name, Melbourne, in honour of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, William Lem, the second Viscount Melbourne, whose entail property was located in the town of Melbourne, Derbyshire, England. Melbourne was announced by the city after announcement on June 25, 1847 of the appointed diploma of the Queen Victoria. When the state of Victoria received the status of independent colony in 1851, Melbourne became his capital. From the moment of discovery of gold in the state in the 1850th years and the beginnings of a gold rush, the city began to develop promptly, providing the region to all necessary and serving as the main port of the southeast of Australia. During rapid development of Melbourne in 1850th and 1860th, many most known city buildings, such as were built. Building of Parliament of Victoria, Treasury Building, State Library, Supreme Court, University, Central Mail, Government Building and also Street. Paul's Cathedrals and St. Patrick. The central city quarters were well planned. In the city numerous boulevards were laid and gardens and parks are laid out. These years Melbourne became the main financial centre of the country. And in the headquarters of several major banks was located. In 1861 in the city the Australia's first stock exchange was formed. By 1880th years rapid development of Melbourne continued. The city became one of the largest cities of the British Empire, at the same time being considered as one of the richest cities of the world. This year's prosperity Melbourne received several international exhibitions and especially for these purposes the constructed exhibition centre. One of journalists who visited the city in 1885 called the city "Amazing Melbourne." This phrase got accustomed, and the city continues to be called so throughout all the 20th century. Rough city construction led to a boom which reached the culmination in 1888. At this time real estate prices were warmed up by optimistic forecasts of industrial development. A large number of high-rise buildings, offices, coffee palaces, profitable houses was as a result built. Not everyone they remained as a result of the subsequent development of the city, building by modern high-rise buildings and also after demolition of many buildings of that era because of toughening of rules of fire safety. However, despite it, Melbourne is still well known for the Victorian architecture. This period is also characterized by broad development of public transport and in particular, networks of radial tramways. The period of prosperity came to the end when in 1891 in the city the strongest economic crisis which led city finance to utter chaos began. During this period in Melbourne 16 small banks and investment communities were closed, and 133 companies declared the elimination. The Melbourne financial crisis was an incitement to start an economic crisis in all Australia which continued during the whole 90th years of the 19th century and also the Australian bank crisis of 1893. It is difficult to overestimate the effect which the Depression rendered on city economy. And though the city continued to develop slowly, consequences of crisis affected an extent of the first decades of the 20th century. From the moment of formation of Australia as independent state on January 1, 1901, Melbourne was announced by the temporary capital of the country. The first federal parliament began the meetings in the building of Royal Exhibition Building since May 9, 1901. The government of Australia moved to Canberra in 1927, however Melbourne continued to remain the residence of the Governor-General of Australia up to 1930. Many major state institutes remained in Melbourne throughout all the 20th century. The city was the headquarters of the Joint Troops of Allies headed by the American General Douglas MacArthur on the Pacific Theater during World War II from 1942 to 1944. During the military period, the industry of Melbourne received numerous military orders that turned the city into the main industrial centre of Australia. After war, the city continued to grow in high gear thanks to generally sharply increased immigration and also prestige of the city as organizer of the Summer Olympic Games of 1956. In the next decades, the network of highways actively developed, and significant increase in personal fleet of vehicles allowed to develop areas adjacent to the city. The central part of Melbourne became more modern thanks to implementation of numerous projects on modernization of city infrastructure. The beginning of economic recovery and development of the mining industry in the late 60s, the beginning of the 70th years of the 20th century well affected the city. Head offices of many largest companies and also the Australian Reserve Bank were transferred to Melbourne. The city remained the financial and business capital of Australia until the end of the 70th years. Then, however, it began to yield gradually leading position to Sydney. The economy of Melbourne strongly suffered during economic downturn in Victoria between 1989 and 1992. During this period, many economic institutes of the city stopped the existence. In 1992, the government coalition headed by Jeff Kennett came to the power. The new administration began a campaign for updating of city economy. Numerous investment projects were started. The campaign for development of Melbourne as the tourist centre began. In the city, many world-famous festivals and events, such as Formula One stage, were held. Works on reconstruction and constructions of the Museum of Melbourne, the Area of Federation, the Melbourne Centre of Exhibitions and Meetings, Crown Casino, CityLink. The paid highway passing across the downtown were large projects of this period. Privatization of some infrastructure facilities of Melbourne, including power supply systems and public transport, was at the same time carried out, and also the systems of financing of many public spheres, including healthcare and education, are changed. Since 1997, in Melbourne, significant growth in the population and jobs is observed. In development of the city, first of all in the industry and the real estate market, considerable international investments invest. According to data of 2006 of Statistical Bureau of Australia, Melbourne since 2000 wins first place among the largest cities of Australia on indicators of economic growth and increase in population. Melbourne is located on the southeast extremity of the mainland of Australia. Geologically, the city stands still a convergence of fields of quaternary lava in the west, soapstone of the Silurian period in the east, and deposits of sandstone of the period of the Holocene in the southeast along Port Phillip Bay. East part of Melbourne is located on River Banks Jarrah and along its valley extending from the coast of Port Phillip Bay to mountains Dandenong and Jarrah. In the northern direction, the city extends along the valley formed by Jarrah's inflows. Meany Ponds Creek, Mary Shout and Plenty's rivers, and comes to an end with the remote areas of Craigieburn and Utilsea. In the southern and southeast direction, Melbourne was stretched along the coast of Port Phillip Bay and Mountains Dandenong. Then urban areas turn on the south, following the coast of the Gulf, and reach Recce Paterson River and the peninsula Mornington. Melbourne, which expanded in this direction, absorbed the city of Frankston and reached almost extremity of the peninsula Mornington in the town Portsea. In the west, Melbourne stretches along the valley of the river Maribyrnong and her inflows up to a foot of mountains Maidstone, and also on rather flat fields of the stiffened lava along Melton in the west, Werribee at the foot of volcanic hills Yuyang and Geelong in the southwest. The largest beaches of Melbourne are located on coast of Port Phillip Bay along southeast districts of the city, such as Port Melbourne, Albert Park, Street Kilda, Ilford, Brighton, Sandringham, Manton and Frankston, however, and in the western areas of Altona and Williamstown is the beaches. The next beaches suitable for surfing are located approximately 85 kilometers from the central part of the city in the areas of Ray, Sorrento and Portsea. Melbourne is located in a zone of a temperate sea climate on Köppen classification and is known for frequent and unexpected weather changing. It is connected with the fact that Melbourne is generally located on the plain, which is framed on the one hand by mountains Dandenong, and with another it borders on waters of Port Phillip Bay. It creates conditions when air masses from the sea and mountains constantly replace each other, having the leading role in the city of very changeable. Expression, 4 seasons for one day, became the hallmark of the city. Winter temperature in Melbourne is, as a rule, lower than in other capital cities of continental Australia. The absolute minimum of temperatures was recorded in the central part of the city on July 21, 1869, when it made -2.8 C. Snowfalls in Melbourne nevertheless happen extremely seldom. The last was recorded in the downtown on August 10, 1986. In foothill areas in the east of Melbourne, snow drops out more often. The last snowfalls near the mountain Dandenong were recorded on August 10, 2005, on November 15, 2006 and on December 25, 2006. Much more often in the city it is possible to see hoar frost and fog. In the spring, weather in Melbourne generally warm, and this period of year is characterized by a low rainfall. The city is also known in very hot and droughty summer. At this time temperature quite often rises above 40 C. The most high temperature of 46.4 C was recorded in the city on February 7, 2009. In spite of the fact that the climate of Melbourne is considered moderate, the city quite often became the witness of unusual and sometimes even extreme natural phenomena. In 1891, Melbourne experienced the strongest flood, during which Chara spread up to 305 meters in width. In 1897, the strongest fire destroyed the whole city quarter between streets of Flinders Street and Flinders Lane, Suinston Street and Elizabeth Street. In 1908, the city experienced a strong heat. On February 2, 1918, the strongest tornado ever happening in the largest Australian cities passed through Brighton, one of coastal areas of Melbourne. It became known in the modern history of Australia as a Tornado Brighton, and is estimated as Class F phenomenon on Fuddit scale. On January 13, 1939, in the city, high temperature of 45.6 C, which took place during a 4-day heat wave, observed through the whole country, was recorded. so-called Black Friday, during which burned out the whole settlements surrounding Melbourne, became one of consequences of this phenomenon. Now they are districts of the city. In 1951 in Melbourne, the snowfall which covered the central part of the city and areas adjoining to him with a deep snow layer was recorded. In February 1972 in Melbourne there was a severe flood, as a result of which Elizabeth Street turned into a continuous stream. On February 8, 1983 the city was covered by a dust storm. On February 16, 1983 Melbourne was surrounded with wildfires which are considered as the strongest fires in the history of Australia of the 20th century. This phenomenon became history as the ashes environment. Hurricanes of big force were observed in the city in January 2004 and February 2005. On December 9, 2006, because of wildfires around Melbourne in the city, the strongest smog for all history of the city was observed. At this moment visibility in the central part of Melbourne made no more than 200 meters. In 2008 Melbourne was overtaken by the next drought and the related fires. Modern Melbourne represents multinational and multicultural community. Nearly a quarter of the population of the state of Victoria are made by the people who were born outside Australia, and Melbourne is the place of residence for natives of 233 countries which speak 180 languages and preach 116 various religions. In the city, the second largest Asian community in Australia, which part the largest Vietnamese, Indian and Sri Lankan communities in the country, are settled down. The Australian natives in particular, representatives of tribes, Wurundjeri, were the first people inhabiting the territory of modern Melbourne. And now the city is the important centre of life of natives. Total number of Aboriginals of Australia is in Melbourne more than 2,000 people. 0.6% of the population of the city. British and Irish were the first European residents. All first settlers who arrived in the state of Victoria during a gold rush, and making most of immigrants up to the beginning of World War II, belonged to them. Discovery of gold and the beginning of a gold rush in the 50s served of the 19th century as the beginning of rapid development of Melbourne. Within the first several months from the moment of discovery of gold in Victoria, the population of Melbourne increased almost by 75%, from 25,000 to 40,000. This growth continued without decreasing for the next decades, and by 1865 Melbourne overtook Sydney on population. In the next years of a gold rush, considerable groups of natives of China, Germany and the United States began to arrive in Victoria and Melbourne. The Melbourne Chinatown, founded in 1854, is not only one of the oldest in Australia, but also around the world. After the end of World War II, to Melbourne the flow of emigrants from the Mediterranean countries, generally from Greece and Italy and also from Turkey and Cyprus, rushed. According to a population census of 2001, in the territory of Big Melbourne 151,785 ethnic Greeks lived. 47% of the Greek population of Australia live in Melbourne. The city is often called the biggest Greek city outside Greece. The demographic situation in Melbourne is characterized by more or less uniform resettlement of representatives of various ethnic groups on districts of the city. However, in some of them representatives of certain groups historically have advantage. It is considered to be that Italians live in Carlton and Brunswick, Macedonians in Thomastown, Hindus and natives of Sri Lanka in southeast areas. The source isn't specified. 32 days. Greeks in Pastover, Northcote and Hughesdale. Vietnamese in Richmond, Springvale and Footscray. Maltese in Sanshane. Serbians in St. Albans. Turks in Coburg. Lebanese in Proudmedus. Russians in Carnegie. Spaniards in Fitzroy. Representatives of North Africa in Flemington. The number of residents of Melbourne who were given birth outside Australia makes 34.8%. An average value over the country minus 23.1%. Great Britain is the homeland for 4.7% of residents. Italy 2.4%. Greece 1.9%. And China 1.3%. Follow further. Population 1836 177 beginning of settling. 1854 card gold rush. 1880 card real estate boom. 1956 card. 1981 card. 1991 3,156,700 economic downturn. 2001 3,366,542. 2006 3,744,373. 2031 4,591,846 forecast. The population census of 2011 showed that 27.2% of the population of Melbourne Catholics, not religious, minus 23.5%. Anglicans minus 10.8%, Orthodox minus 5.5%, Buddhists minus 4.0%, Muslims minus 2.3%, Judaists minus 1.1%. Statistically, 4 of 10 Jews of Australia live in Melbourne. The city is also the house for the greatest number of people among other Australian cities which are the victims of the Holocaust. In spite of the fact that the general demographic situation in the state of Victoria is subject to fluctuations, Statistical Services of Melbourne note constant increases in number of residents approximately on people a year since 2003. Melbourne is now the main place where new immigrants from abroad aspire, at the same time having overtaken Sydney on this indicator. Besides, now the city grows at the expense of immigrants from other large cities of Australia in view of more affordable prices of housing and rather low cost of life. Within the last several years, increase in population in such districts of Melbourne as Melton, Wyndham and Casey was the highest among local municipalities of Australia. According to forecasts, if growth of the population continues in Melbourne the same rates, then the city can become the largest in Australia by 2028 again. Population density of Melbourne after World War II began to decrease thanks to development of new territories under residential areas, to development of network of public transport and increase in the park of personal vehicles. This year's development of the city happened generally in east direction. After numerous public discussions in the 1980th years and economic downturn of the 1990th years, the decision to develop the city in the western direction and at the same time to increase population density in the central regions was made. Melbourne was founded on the northern river bank Jarrah in 1835 on the site of 1.6 km by 0.8 km. Construction in the city was conducted according to Hoddle's plan. English Hoddle Grid. Developed by Robert Hoddle, who was at the time the land surveyor of Colony. All main streets of the central part of Melbourne still pass in strict accordance with this plan. The downtown is known for the historical streets and passages, the most known of which Block Place and Royal Arcade, in the territory of which numerous shops and cafes are located. His central part abounds with numerous historical and interesting buildings in the architectural relation, such as Royal Exhibition Building, Building of Parliament of Victoria, the Central Hall of Melbourne. And though the place where city building began, still is considered the centre, it isn't the geographical centre because in the 20th century Melbourne generally grew in east direction. In many respects it is possible to call Melbourne the typical Australian city as his development, especially in the 20th century, was defined by development of dormitory areas where the dream of each Australian family of the certain house with a small ground could be fulfilled. The most part of the mother country of Melbourne is characterised by rather low population density. Laying of network of the radial railroads and tramways contributed to such development of the city when people preferred to lodge in areas with rather low price of the earth and near so-called transport corridors. Thanks to a huge number of parks, gardens and boulevards, Melbourne very often is called Garden City, and the state of Victoria is known as the State of Gardens since the 19th century. The majority of the most known gardens and parks is located in close proximity to the downtown. In Melbourne there are 5 of 6 highest buildings of Australia, the highest of which is the Tower Eureka today. The administration of Melbourne manages the central part of the city, which includes the central business district and some adjacent areas. However, the head of administration, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, often, especially during the trips abroad, is considered as the representative of Big Melbourne, which includes all territory of the mother country. In 2006, John So, who was then on the post of the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, was awarded with a prestigious award, the World Mayor. In 2008 this post was held by again chosen Robert Dahl. The rest of the territory of Big Melbourne is divided into 30 local municipalities. All of them have the status of the city administrations except for 4 areas which have the status of suburban. Regional administrations form councils and are responsible for a number of functions, which are transferred to them by the government of the state of Victoria according to the Law on Local Government of 1989. Such as city planning and collecting garbage. The majority of the actions infringing on the interests of all city are held by the government of the state of Victoria, which sits at the building of Parliament of the state of Victoria located on Spring Street. In the sphere of responsibility of government are included public transport, main roads, traffic control of transport, police, education, planning and management of city infrastructure. Because 2/3 of the population of Victoria live in Melbourne, the government of the state traditionally has a great influence in city affairs. Such situation isn't unique for Australia, as in many states of the government of states run still big mother countries. In Melbourne, the seaport, largest in Australia, is located. His annual commodity turnover is about $75 billion. Also 39% of a national container turn are the share of the Melbourne seaport. In Melbourne is located a key part of the enterprises of the Australian automotive industry, which the assembly plants Ford and Toyota and also the plant on production of engines for cars represent Holden. The city is also base for many other industries, and at the same time is the largest financial and commercial centre. Melbourne, the centre of modern technologies. The industries connected with computers or information technologies provide jobs of more than 6,000 people. That is the third indicator across Australia. This industry has a turnover of $19.8 billion, from which all $615 million go for export. Melbourne is the largest centre of bank activity in the Pacific Rim. 2 of 4 banks entering into Big Four of Australia, NAB and ANZ, have the headquarters in this city. Melbourne takes a leading place among the largest cities of Australia on number of the pension funds. In the largest pension fund of Australia, Federal Fund of the Future, is located. Tourism is one of primary branches of economy of Melbourne now. According to 2004, the city was visited by about 4.6 million Australian tourists and 1.88 million tourists from abroad. For the expired period of 2008, Melbourne selected a palm at Sydney as main tourist centre of Australia. Melbourne is the city where many largest Australian corporations are based, including 5 entering the top 10 on a total turnover, namely ANZ, Thait Billiton, National Australia Bank, Rio Tinto and Telstra. Here leading research institutes of such organisations as Business Council of Australia and the Australian Council of Labour Unions are located. Melbourne takes the 34th place in the list of 50 largest world financial centres according to the Index of World Commercial Centres of MasterCard, and the 2nd place in Australia, conceding only to Sydney. The city gains increasing value as the centre of the international meetings and conferences. In February 2006, construction of the largest conference centre on 5,000 places began. Investment project cost is estimated at $1 billion. In 2014, according to The Economist Melbourne magazine, I took the 6th place among the most expensive cities of the world, and I became the most expensive city of Australia, the 2nd after Sydney. The transport system of Melbourne originates in the second half of the 19th century, when trams and trains were fixed assets of public transport. From 1950th years, in connection with sharp increase in number of private cars, highways and the highway in high gear were under construction. Its trend remained for the next decades, that led to the fact that the number of the people who were constantly using public transport was reduced from 25% as it was in the 1940th years, up to 9%. In 1999, public transport in Melbourne was privatised. In 1976, on the highway of Melbourne, phone numbers of an emergency communication appeared. The tram network in Melbourne is considered the world's largest. The tram in Melbourne is not only the vehicle, but also an element of cultural heritage and an important tourist site. Since 2015, journey by tram in the downtown free. There are also several cars of the tram restaurant. The network of trains of the local message in Melbourne consists of 17 lines. All of them represent radial lines, except for partially underground ring side passing the cities across the central business district. The railroads are generally electrified. The largest in the city is the Flinders station of the street stage. The source isn't specified. 3759 days. In 1926, this station was considered as the world's largest in the number of passengers. The railroads connect Melbourne to many cities in the state of Victoria and also to Sydney and Adelaide. Trains of the long-distance message send from the station of Southern Cross. In 2012, the Melbourne Railroads released a roller of "Dumb Ways to Die," banned in the Russian Federation for suicide promotion subsequently. The bus network of Melbourne consists of about 300 routes which generally serve remote suburbs and fill intervals between railway and tram lines. Melbourne is characteristic high degree of dependence on the individual transport. Only 7.1% of the population use public transport, however lately this share increased in the basic because of the increased petrol prices a little. In Melbourne there are about 3.6 million private cars and 22320 kilometers of roads. That is one of the highest rates in the world in per capita terms. The Melbourne port is the largest seaport of Australia. In 2007 through port about 2 million containers in 12 months were transported, that put it on the 5th place among ports of the Southern Hemisphere. Melbourne is the most important cruise port of Australia along with Sydney. From the city the regular ferries connecting continental Australia and the island of Tasmania go. Planes of Qantas and Jetstar Airlines near the passenger terminal of the International Airport of Melbourne. In Melbourne there are 4 airports. The largest is the International Airport of Melbourne, located in Tullamarine. The airport is the place of basing of such airlines as Jetstar Airlines and Tiger Airway Australia, Cargo Airlines, Australian Air Express and Toll Priority, and also the large intermediate centre for Qantas and Virgin Blue. The Avalon Airport is located between Melbourne and Geelong and is the second most important centre of basing for Jetstar Airline. A top-on transformation of the airport into the second Melbourne International Airport was carried on since 2008, but only in 2012 the government of the state of Victoria gave on this formal consent. Besides, this airport is used by a number of airlines as transport and repair bases. The Moorabbin Airport, being located in a southeast part of the city, is the large centre of small aircraft and besides, accepts the limited number of commercial flights. The Essendon Airport, which before the end of construction of the airport in Tullamarine was the main airport of Melbourne, accepts commercial and transport flights now and also is the large centre of small aircraft. The education system in Melbourne, also as well as in all the state of Victoria, is under control of Department of Education and Early Development of the Child. DEEC. This organisation acts as the advisor for 2 ministries of the state of Victoria involved in management of an education system, namely Ministries of Education and Ministries of Children and Early Development of the Child. The education system is constructed according to the 3-stage scheme. Primary education, secondary education, and the higher education. School education is obligatory for children aged from 6 up to 15 years. At public schools about 2/3 of school students study, the rest falls to the share of private schools. Education at public schools up to 12 years is free, but it doesn't extend to foreign students. Irrespective of at what school is trained, state or private, upon termination of education students have to have a certain level of knowledge and confirm it, having passed uniform examinations. The largest universities of Melbourne and at the same time some of the largest in Australia are the University of Melbourne and Monash University. In 2006 the University of Melbourne was called by the second best university of Australia. Besides, according to a research of the British magazine The Times Higher Education Supplement, the University of Melbourne takes the 22nd place among the best educational institutions of the world, and the Monash University is in this list on the 38th place. In the same research, Melbourne is called the fourth best university city of the planet after London, Boston and Tokyo. In Melbourne, the oldest higher educational institutions of Australia, including law school, 1857. Technical, 1860. Medical schools, 1862. Dental surgery, 1897. Musical schools, 1891. Are located. All of them are a part of the University of Melbourne, which, thus, is the oldest higher educational institution of the state of Victoria and the second the oldest in Australia. Also in Melbourne, the Australian Institute of Space Researches was in the early 90s created. The academic year usually lasts in Melbourne, as well as in all Victoria, since the end of January on the middle of December for elementary and high schools and also colleges, and since the end of February until the end of November for the universities. The 18th International Botanical Congress, which passed in Melbourne from July 24 to July 30, 2011, was an important event. More than 5,000 scientists took part in his work. About 30 public hospitals and hospitals in the territory of Melbourne, and also 13 more organisations providing medical care are under authority of the Government of Victoria. Besides, in the city there is a large number of private clinics and hospitals. Melbourne is the most important centre of medical science in Australia. Melbourne, the cultural and sports capital of Australia. In the city, a large number of annual cultural events is held. Many largest Australian museums and exhibitions are located here. Also, the local architecture is unique. Musical culture has deep roots in the city. Many famous Australian musicians are natives of Melbourne. In recent years, the city gained popularity in the world as one of the main centres of street art. This type of the modern city art became popular in Melbourne so that it found reflection in guides. The city is considered one of the main world centres of the Victorian architecture. 1837-1901. In which a large number of buildings of this style remained. Also, we don't think of architectural appearance of the city without the fine examples of modern architecture which appeared in Melbourne since the middle of the 20th century. Theatre life in Melbourne is very different. The city is the house for the National Ballet of Australia. The Royal Melbourne Philharmonic Orchestra was based in the city in 1853 and is the oldest professional orchestra of Australia and the only thing carrying a rank Royal. In Melbourne, more theatres than in any other city of Australia are located. Also, the city is the main centre of the Australian fashion. Here annually there take place fashion festivals, cinema, music, etc. Melbourne Cricket Platform, one of the largest sports constructions of the city. Melbourne is widely known as the cultural and sports capital of Australia. Annually in it there takes place a large number of national and international sports competitions. As the most considerable of them are considered the Open Championship of Australia. Tennis. This tournament is one of stages of the Grand Slam. Grand Prix of Australia, Formula, Cup of Melbourne, horse races, final of a season of the Australian Football League. Besides, Melbourne received the Summer Olympic Games of 1956 and the Game of the Commonwealth of 2006. In 2003 Melbourne played World Cup games on rugby. In 2001 Melbourne became the first city in the Southern Hemisphere receiving the World Cup in polo. In 2007 in the city the World Water Sports Championship was held. At the beginning of 2008 Melbourne received games of the countries of the Pacific Rim. Melbourne is the homeland of the Australian soccer, the game uniting elements of rugby and soccer. The most popular sport in Australia by the number of the viewers visiting competitions. In the city 9 of 16 teams playing in the Australian Football League. AFL. Settle down. The final of a season of AFL is considered the largest internal Australian sports event and is held in the city last Saturday of September. In Melbourne there are 29 sports constructions capable to accommodate in the stands more than people everyone. In 2000 the construction of the stadium, largest in the city, Telstra Dome, capable to accept people was completed. This stadium became the first ever sports construction on which it is possible to play soccer and cricket matches under a roof. In 2006 the London research and advisory company ArcSport called Melbourne the best city in the world for holding sports competitions. It allowed to consider Melbourne the informal sports capital of the world. The largest newspapers of Melbourne are Herald Sun belonging to Rupert Murdoch and The Age belonging to the Fairfax Company, and also the evening tabloid X's, which is also released by Murdoch. The national newspaper The Australian appears in Melbourne in the form of special release for Victoria. This newspaper also belongs to Murdoch. Murdoch News Group publishes several weeklies and more than 50% of stocks of Fairfax own, thus, all daily newspapers appearing in Melbourne are included into the empire of Murdocha. The largest in Australia, the municipal media company, Leader Newspapers, publishes 33 local weekly newspapers which cover problems of areas and municipalities of Melbourne. 29 digital TV channels air on Melbourne. The analog television was completely disconnected on December 31, 2013 across all territory of Australia. Most TV channels leaves with a logo commercial. 7, 9 and 10. And the sponsored state. ABS SEs. Of networks. Also there is Municipal Channel C. In Melbourne broadcast a large number of radio stations. The most known: 3M's Triple J, Fox of FM, 3O, Sen 1116, which generally belong to three main networks of the city. Ed Radio Australia, Austereo and Southern Cross Broadcasting. Tourism is the most important component of economy of Melbourne. As of 2004 the city this year was visited by 7.6 million Australian tourists and 1.88 million tourists from abroad. Thanks to carrying out in the city of a large number of sports competitions of the international level, sports tourism is widespread here. Among the tourists visiting the city, a considerable part is made by young people, travelers as backpackers. In 2008, Melbourne for the first time overtook Sydney on such indicator as the quantity of money spent in the city by the Australian tourists. On January 30, 2019, the Information Travel and Leisure portal published the rating of the most romantic cities of the world. During the research, the number of the people seeking to make proposal or to marry in the territory of a certain city was analyzed. Also, the sexual activity of inhabitants and existence of favorable conditions for light acquaintances was analyzed. By results of a research, Melbourne took the 10th place in this rating. The State Library of Victoria, one of the largest libraries in Australia. The building of library represents an outstanding example of colonial classicism. It's not only book storage, but at the same time important center of cultural life of the city. There take place many exhibitions, conferences, meetings with writers. The building of Flinders Street Station Stage, being located in the downtown, the building of the station is a peculiar hallmark of the city. His image can be seen on the numerous posters, cards and badges devoted to Melbourne. This station is the oldest railway station in Australia. Now it is considered a monument of architecture and is under protection of the Government of Victoria. The Building of Parliament of Victoria, one of outstanding examples of civil architecture not only in Australia, but also in the world. In this building during the period from 1901 to 1927, the Federal Parliament of Australia was located. Royal Exhibition Building. The building is located in the Carlton Garden Park, is constructed in 1880. Fine example of the Victorian architecture. The building, the first in Australia, received the status of the World Heritage of UNESCO. In this building, the first meeting of the Australian Parliament took place on May 9, 1901, at which independence of Australia was declared. The cottage of the Captain James Cook. The small stone cottage belonging in the past to family of the Captain James Cook is transferred to Melbourne from England in the first half of the 20th century. This building is a national shrine of Australia and the most important tourist attraction of the city. Crown Casino, the largest casino and the entertainment complex located on the southern riverbank Jarrah. Crown is one of business cards and the main tourist attractions of the city. The Melbourne Aquarium is located in the downtown, on the riverbank Jarrah. Possesses an interesting collection of sea and river life of Australia and also adjacent parts of the world ocean. The Melbourne Museum, the largest museum in the Southern Hemisphere. Expositions of the museum are devoted to the history of Australia, the state of Victoria and directly the city of Melbourne. The building of the museum represents an interesting copy of modern architecture. Besides museum expositions, in the building the auditorium, theatre, IMAX movie theatre are located. Memory Monument, one of the monuments to soldiers, participants of all military conflicts, largest in Australia, in which the country participated. Is the idea of the project of the main building. The legendary mausoleum in Halicarnas, one of 7 wonders of the world, is used. The Museum of Immigration, rather new museum devoted to history of the immigrants who arrived to Australia from every corner of the world. Michael's world-famous Camera Museum, the museum devoted to the history of the photo. Jara Embankment. National Gallery of Victoria, the oldest and largest art gallery in Australia. The area of Federation, one of the main places of public meetings and actions in the central part of the city. I am famous, modern and in many respects for contradictory architecture. Here numerous exhibition facilities, the center of cinematography, restaurants, cafe, bars are located. The big open space of the area connects among themselves the central part of Melbourne, Jara Embankment and adjacent parks. Rialto Tower, one of the highest buildings in the city and in Australia. On the 55th floor of the building, at the height of 234 meters, the View du Monde restaurant is at the place of the former observation deck. The Market of the Queen Victoria, the oldest market located in close proximity to the downtown. Along with purely commercial value, has important historical and tourist value. Is one of the most visited places of the city. Street. Pulse Cathedral, the main Anglican cathedral of Melbourne, is in the downtown, forming an architectural axis of the central part of Melbourne. I am famous for the body and the highest spike among Anglican churches outside England. St. Patrick's Cathedral, the largest Catholic cathedral in the city, represents an outstanding example of neo-Gothic style. The cathedral is the largest church construction constructed in the world in the 19th century. Arts Centre of Melbourne. Tower Eureka, the highest skyscraper of Melbourne and one of the highest on the Australian continent. On the 88th floor of the building at the height of 297 meters the observation deck is located. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.